Goeiemôre vriende. Ons gaan vanoggend aan met ons studie oor Hagar en Sarai. And yesterday we tackled Galatians 4, that is in conjunction with Genesis 16 and 17, where we learn about Hagar and Sarai. So what we learned yesterday is that Paul is describing two types of relationship. One is in a bondage relationship from a mixed unfaithful bride, and the other is a good relationship from the free woman, the woman that's been freed from Egypt, and the other one wants to go back to Egypt. So the bride that still has Egypt inside of her, that is an Egyptian woman, that basically was chosen because Abraham and Sarah didn't want to wait. In the flesh, they decided to make their own plans, just like Adam and Chava made their own plans in the Garden of Eden. Just like when we make our own plans and make up our own minds, we are basically in that bondage relationship. But the moment you turn away from serpent language and deception and you turn to the tree of life and you come out of Egypt, you are a free woman. And that's what Sarai represents. So we learned that at Mount Sinai, it was supposed to be a beautiful marriage. It wasn't supposed to turn into the bride making a molten calf and calling that the God that brought them out of Egypt. So we saw how difficult it must have been. If we can just imagine, if we had to go through something like that, how difficult it must have been for Yahuwah, who brought his bride out and did so much for her, and yet she turned around. She turned back to the gods of Egypt while he was busy writing the Ketubah. So how this wife of his that was in bondage, that he brought out from bondage, so quickly went back into bondage, of turning back to Egypt and turning their back on him and worshipping false gods as if these false gods were the creators of heaven and earth, as if they were the Almighty who destroyed Egypt with 10 plagues, and as if they were the husband that brought them out of Egypt with a mighty hand. Instead of listening and obeying and agreeing to the Ketubah, they accepted the marriage proposal, but they did not want to do their part of the covenant. And that day, if you read that whole story in Exodus, 3,000 were killed. And it's so amazing. That was the first Pentecost. And the big Pentecost in the time of Peter after Yeshua's ascension. Go and read it in the book of Acts, Acts 2. Where at the first Pentecost, 3,000 were killed. That basically were the bride who still had Egypt in her. At the Pentecost in the book of Acts, 3,000 were saved on that day. 3,000 accept the good news and got baptized and came into the covenant, became children of the free woman. Just amazing, the prophetic significance of the number 3,000. But yeah, that day 3,000 were killed. And under bondage they stayed, never understanding that the Torah was supposed to free them from the Egypt inside of them. Because Yahuwah wanted them to choose him by free will. And the Torah is freedom. To live in a country without any laws. Will that be freedom? Will you be free to drive in your vehicle if there's no laws on the road? Freedom is found in his word that describes to you how to live, what to do and what not to do, so that you can be free to serve him in freedom and not under bondage from sin, which is transgression of the law, and not under the authority of any other besides him. So Jeremiah 31:33, but this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says Yahuwah. After what days? Well, first of all, the days that he took them by the hand and he brought them out, and he was a husband to them, but they rejected his covenant. But those days also represents the last days, like Deuteronomy 4. If in the last days you search for Yahuwah and you obey his voice, he will bring you back. And then he will make this renewed covenant with the house of Israel that he is regathering. After those days, says Yahuwah, I will put my law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts. So this law, this Torah, that is for the free woman to choose God by free will. This law, when written, not on stone only, but on the stone tablets of your heart. I will take out the stony heart and give you a heart of flesh, he says in Ezekiel. I'll put my law in your inward parts, in your heart, write it with my own finger as I wrote it on the stone, on the rock. And then I will be their God, and then they shall be my people. And they shall be my people are me. The book of Isaiah, remember, those who were called not my people shall be called sons of the living God, 153 fish. Because we did get lost in the ocean of humanity and of tribes and nations and tongues, because we didn't stay on the path that he gave us. We wanted to return back to Egypt. And Egypt represents a lot of things. It represents comfort for some people, for other people sin, bad sin, like really adultery and idolatry and theft and murder and cursing and bad things. But that's sin that's easily recognizable. But for some people, Egypt represents the sin of lawlessness. They don't do the bad things like cursing and stealing and murdering, but yet they reject the law. So everything against the law is sin, but people don't realize that. They think sinning is just if you are a bad person like Hitler. They don't understand sinning is even if you eat a piece of pork. It's against Father's commandments, his commandments for life from the beginning, from Noah's time, from Cain and Abel's time. So at the end of the day, Egypt represents so many things for so many different people. But it is basically the symbol of any other religion besides the one that God wants us to come back to. So the same problem Adam and Chava had in the garden. God wanted them to choose to obey him with their free will. That's why he didn't put the tree of knowledge behind a fence. It was their free will. So he gave them free will. And out of their own will, they chose to listen to the serpent. And then they chose to do what they wanted to do. Because he only entices you. He doesn't, the serpent, Satan, the devil, demons, they don't make you do nothing. They bring the sin to your door. Like God said to Cain, sin is crouching at your door. Sin comes to your door and he knocks. Just like Yeshua knocks in Revelation 3 verse 20. And he suggests something to you, like in the garden. He suggested to Chava that she will not die. And by exercising their free will, they and the animal kingdom and all of nature came under bondage and curses. I mean, remember we talked about this. There was no thorns and thistles before sin. And after they transgressed Yahweh's law, the whole world came under this bondage. We put ourselves under Hagar, under bondage. It's not the law that's bondage, as the church teaches. It's our disobedience and our free will that's choosing incorrectly. The same with Abram and Sarah. They could not wait for the time to be completed and for God to fulfill His promise and His plan for them to have a son. They could not endure and trust in God, just like Chava did not trust in God, just like Israel did not trust God at Mount Sinai, and they stood afar, they stood away from Him. So Sarah and Abraham exercised their free will. And what was the result? Sarah gave Hagar to Abraham so that they could have a child. That's not what God said. And that is bondage. That is trouble. All the way today, where the Palestinians and the Jews are killing each other left, right, and center in Israel. We can see the physical result of Abraham and Sarah's ongeduldig, their impatience, and their choosing incorrectly, making the wrong choice out of their free will. So much bondage and trouble, even up to today, physically. We can see the offspring of Ishmael and the offspring of the tribe of Judah from Isaac and Jacob, the lineage. We can see the physical trouble and bondage that they're having in the land of Israel at the moment. But again, hugely in the spiritual. I can see the seed from serpent in the seed of the bondwoman. And that's always luring you back to Egypt, luring you back to Babylon, luring you back to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, luring you back to the well, the polluted well, to drink from that, instead of realizing in the valley of Shechem that we need to understand there are two mountains. One is curses, one is blessing. Blessing you get when you're obedient, curses you get when you're disobedient. Disobedience is curses, is bondage. It's so clear in the Bible. Why are the church teaching that the law is bondage? The law is not bondage. What happened at Mount Sinai is bondage. What was supposed to be a beautiful wedding ceremony ended up in the biggest harlotry. She fornicated with another husband right under her husband's nose. How the heck will you feel if your husband does that to you? Or if your wife does that to you? Will that wife be free to have a good relationship with you from there on? Because at Mount Sinai, we want to do what we want to do, when we want to do it, and how we want to do it, instead of waiting and trusting in the promises and the prophecies of Yahuwah. Galatians 4:23. But he who was of the bondwoman was born after the flesh. And that was Ishmael, right? But he that's born of the free woman was born by promise. Yahuwah promised Abraham a son. So Isaac was the son of promise. They just had to wait for him. But they couldn't. So they chose after the flesh, after their own will. We need to sacrifice ourselves. We need to die to ourselves. We need to fight against the flesh, because the flesh is your will. Not everyone that says to me, Lord, Lord, will come into the kingdom, but he that does the will of my Father and not your own will. So he that was born of the bondwoman was born of the flesh. So born after the flesh, we compare to being born after the promise. God gave Adam and Chava promises, right? But they chose their own fleshly will. And that resulted in them losing the promise. God gave Abraham promises, but he chose to be persuaded by Sarai, who could not wait anymore for her baby. And they chose in the fleshly will to have a surrogate baby by Hagar. And Abraham almost lost all his promises. But Yahuwah confirmed, Genesis 17:20. And as for Ishmael, Abraham, I hear your prayers. Behold, I have blessed him. I will make him fruitful. I will multiply him exceedingly. exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget. Amazing, hey? Ishmael gets 12 princes, and Isaac gets Isaac gets Jacob, and Jacob gets 12 sons. Just amazing. And I will make him a great nation. But, verse 21, my covenant, Abraham, I establish with Isaac, which Sarah he shall bear unto thee at this time in the next year. Amazing. He even knew his name a year before the time. Amazing. His covenant, his seed, his word, his bloodline is through promise. He is always promised his covenant, seed, word, bloodline. He's promised this from the beginning. Remember, Genesis 3:15, your seed will crush the serpent's head. He's always been doing this through promises. And if we don't start believing and accepting these promises, and we want to understand with our flesh, and we want to look at the system that's been working for us for the last 1,700 years, that is an Egyptian system. It is not working, but that's all we're used to. We're so used to Egypt, we are comfortable there. And the promises of God, we've been told, is just for the Jews and just for the Old Testament. And by believing that, not subjecting to his will and his authority, we are under bondage. And that bondage will make that we don't understand his promises. And that's exactly what the serpent wants. He doesn't want you to believe the promises of the Old Testament, that it can be for you as well, but that you need to be part of Israel. He wants you to reject that, because then you can just be part of his seed. He doesn't care exactly what you believe, as long as you don't believe everything God promised. So, Luke 4:18, the Spirit of Yahuwah is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, and very important, to preach deliverance to the captives. And then a couple of other things as well. But deliverance to the captives. He delivered us out of captivity. I am Yahuwah your Elohim, who brought you from the land of bondage. Remember? How many times does he say that? Yeshua is preaching deliverance to the captives, even those that has gone back to Egypt. Just to hear him, Shema Yisrael, and to believe in these promises and to come out of Egypt. That's all that's needed. And that is the promise of the free woman. Free to choose him as husband. Not by force, because he didn't force Adam and Chava or Israel or nobody. Or by necessity, or by fear. But he brought them out of Egypt, and he showed his bride his mighty right hand. And he showed her how he can protect her. And she was supposed to fall in love with him. The free woman must endure and trust the promise of her husband and choose him because she loves him. Not by force or necessity or fear. Just like in the wilderness, Israel wanted to stone Moses and return to Egypt. And I'm sorry to say, but that is what the church is teaching us. Don't listen to Moses. Moses is not for the church. Moses is for the Jews. And by believing that, we return to bondage. We return to Egypt. We return to lawlessness. But just like in the wilderness, the prophetic picture is Israel wanted to stone Moses and return to Egypt. There's always serpent seed mixed with God's seed. And they always want to kill. The one seed always wants to kill the other. Just like when Israel was on the border of the promised land. They wanted to stone Joshua and Caleb and return to Egypt. The bride is forever trying to turn back to the pigsty. Remember the parable of the prodigal son? The bride is forever turning back to the pigsty, where she was saved out from, where she came out from. forever going back to her disobedient ways, which represents turning back to Egypt, turning back to rubbish, turning back to filth, to garbage, to abomination, to sin, foolishness. Proverbs 15:5. A fool despises his father's instruction. An instruction in Hebrew is Torah. Proverbs 26:11. As a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool returns to his foolishness. Revelation 3:15 and 16. I know your works, that you are not cold or hot. I would that you were cold or hot, but because you are lukewarm, I will vomit you out of my mouth. Leviticus 18:26, 27, 28. And you shall keep my statutes and my judgments, and shall do not any of these disgusting acts of the pagans, neither the native nor the alien who stays with you, for the men of the land who are before you have done all these disgusting things, and the land is defiled, Canaan. Do not do these, lest the land vomits you out, as it has vomited out the nations that was before you. A fool despises Torah, returns to his own foolishness, Egypt vomit, and the Torah, the land, will vomit them out. That is the bondwoman. The seed of the bondwoman will always try to kill the seed of the free woman. Genesis 3:15, he shall bite you in the heel, but you shall crush his head. And we can see the spirit of the serpent in Cain killing Abel, in Nimrod wanting to kill Abram, in Ishmael wanting to kill Isaac, in Esau wanting to kill Jacob, in Judah wanting to kill Joseph, and on and on and on and on. Galatians 4:29. But then, even as he, born according to the flesh, Ishmael, persecuted the one born according to the Spirit, Isaac, so it is also now. Can you see? We could see the spirit of the serpent in all the firstborn brothers from the beginning. They all wanted to kill the one with the seed of the Ruach that was born according to the Spirit, with the tree of life seed in him, with the words of God in him. And so it is also today. The seed of the bondwoman, the serpent, Egypt, Babylon, wants to steal you away from marriage at Mount Sinai, away from the tree of life, and away from listening and obeying. Romans 6:15, 16. What then? Shall we sin because we are not under the penalty of the Torah, but under grace? Listen carefully to Paul's question, because Paul is falsely portrayed as somebody who says we do not keep Torah. Paul is asking us, and he's telling us we are under grace. We know we're under grace because, remember, if you race over the stop street and you get stopped by the police traffic officer, and he gives you, at that moment you are under law because you broke the law. But if he gives you grace and he lets you go, you are under grace. So now Paul is asking, what then? Shall you continue sinning because you are not under the penalty of the Torah, but under grace? What will you do at the next stop street? Will you obey the stop street law, or will you race over it again? Paul says, let it not be. The King James says, God forbid that you continue sinning now that you're under grace. And he says, and this explains to us Hagar. Listen, it's difficult words, I know. But he's talking about, if you say you're under grace, right? Then you need to be obedient to the Torah. Because transgressing the Torah is sin. And we cannot continue sinning if we're under grace. Remember the prostitute? Go and sin no more. And now he's telling us in verse 16, do you not know that to whom you present yourselves as slaves for obedience, you are slaves to whom you obey, whether of sin to death, if you eat from this tree you will die, or to obedience to righteousness. So listen carefully. Do you understand? The free woman came out of Egypt. She got washed by immersion, baptism in the sea. And she came to Mount Sinai because now she loves her husband. And she reads his ketubah, his marriage agreement. Now she's under grace. And now she gets married and she's got covenant relationship. And she keeps the Torah, because if you keep the Torah, you don't sin. Transgression of the Torah is sin. And because she was saved from Egypt, from sin, by the blood of the Lamb, and washed clean, and falling in love with her God, she's the free woman, choosing now to get married out of freedom. But if you follow that route, and you get to Mount Sinai, and you break this rules of the ketubah, this rules of the marriage covenant, then you are slaves to sin. Because Paul says it, and God says it himself, you either worship the one and you hate the other, or you hang on to the one and you despise the other. Yeshua says that about, what was it called? Mammon, God and Mammon. It's the same principle. Because if you sin again, if you continue sinning, if you continue breaking the law while you are under grace and no longer under the penalty of the law, because you accept the blood of the Lamb that paid your penalty for your sin, if you continue sinning, you are a slave to sin. So if you obey lawlessness, you're a slave to lawlessness, and that will lead to death. And that is the bondwoman. But if you are a slave, if you obey the Torah, and you see that he became flesh, and you fall in love with him, and you worship him, and you respect him, and you obey him, and you have covenant with him, then you are his slave. And he takes you from a slave. You've been slaves for 400 years in Egypt, and he takes you out, and he fulfills the promise of making us children and bride. The promise he gave from the beginning. And now, what is that verse? John 1 verse 12. Aan hulle wat in hom glo gee hy die reg om kinders van God genoem te word. For those who believe in him, who believe in his promises and come out of Egypt, to them he gives the right to be called children of God. So we do progress from slaves out of Egypt to children to bride, because we subject ourselves to his authority. But disobeying God automatically and by default puts you under the authority of the prince of this world, and then you are his slave to your own destruction. And that is what happened at Mount Sinai. So now, us today, not like our forefathers, that he took by the hand and brought out of slavery, but they rejected him, although he was a husband to them. Just like that, us today, hearing the voice of the shepherd, return to Mount Sinai, but this time the Torah is written on our hearts, because we serve him out of love. And this is the new Jerusalem, the free woman. Jeremiah 31:31. Get to know that verse out of your head. Revelation 21, 2 and 3. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from Yahuwah, having been prepared as a bride, having been adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, behold, hey, remember, Yod, hey, Vav, hey, behold the hand, behold the nail. Behold, the tabernacle of Yahuwah is now with men, and he will tabernacle with us, and we will be his people. And Yahuwah himself will be with us and be our Elohim. Galatians 4:30. But what does the scripture say? Cast out the slave woman and the son, for in no way shall the son of the slave woman, Ishmael, inherit with the son of the free woman, Isaac. Christianity teaches that this means the law must be cast out, and those that are under the yoke of the law must be cast out because they want to obey the law, and that's not freedom. But you've learned now, and I've shown you out of scripture, that it means exactly the opposite. It means exactly the opposite. Who is the bondwoman? And who's the son of the bondwoman, the slave woman that is cast out? Is the obedient bride the bondwoman to be cast out? Or the disobedient bride, is she the bondwoman to be cast out? The bride that was given to Abraham because of a fleshly, impatient decision by Abraham and Sarai. And I'm going to finish with Matthew 7:21, because we want to understand now which bride is to be cast out, the obedient one or the disobedient one. Which one is going to be cast out, as Galatians 4:30 says? Which one will not be inheriting? Matthew 7:21-23. It will not be that just anyone who says to me, Master, Master, will enter into the kingdom of heaven, but only those who do the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Master, Master, did we not prophesy in your name? Did we not cast out demons in your name? Did we do not many works of power in your name? And yes, we can see that all over the world today. But I will declare to them, from everlasting, from the beginning, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who work lawlessness, Torahlessness. Matthew 25:10-12. But they, going away to buy oil, the bridegroom came, and those ready went in with him to the wedding feast, and the door was shut. And afterwards the rest of the virgins also came, saying, Master, Master, open to us. But answering he said, Truly I say to you, go away, I never knew you, workers of lawlessness. Revelation 22:14-15. Blessed are the ones doing his commandments, that their authority will be over the tree of life, and they may enter by the gates into the city. And who are outside? If inside are the people can come inside that are doing his commandments, who's outside? Outside are the dogs and the sorcerers and the fornicators and the murderers and the idolaters, and everyone loving a lie and doing falsehood. It's a false lie from the false angel of light, the serpent in the tree of knowledge, that we do not need to live obedient to our bridegroom. And that is the bondwoman that is cast out.